One small mistake, and what happened next was beyond anyone's imagination. This story started like any ordinary morning, but by the end of the day, an entire apartment building would be living in fear. It was around 7 a.m. when Michael, a security guard, arrived for his morning shift. After signing the attendance register, he began his routine patrol around the luxury 32-story apartment building where some of the richest people in the city lived. Everything seemed normal until he reached the back of the building. A group of stray dogs stood in one spot, barking and circling something on the ground. They refused to move. Michael felt something was wrong. As he slowly walked closer, his heart nearly stopped. A man's body was lying on the concrete. His skull had been completely crushed from the fall, and blood was still spreading across the ground. One of his eyes remained wide open, frozen with an expression of unimaginable terror. It didn't look like the face of someone who had simply died. It looked like the face of someone who had seen something horrifying just before his final breath. Terrified, Michael ran back to the security office and called the police. Within minutes, officers arrived and sealed off the entire area. Residents gathered outside, watching in complete shock. While examining the scene, one detective slowly looked up. A single window on the 10th floor was standing wide open, and that was where the investigation began. To be continued. The victim's body was sent for an autopsy while another police team rushed to the 10th floor. Their destination, apartment 1002. The front door wasn't locked. As soon as the officers stepped inside, they carefully searched every room. The apartment was spotless. No signs of a struggle. No blood. Nothing looked out of place. For a moment, it seemed impossible that anyone had died here. Then one officer walked into the bathroom and immediately noticed something strange. The rear bathroom window was completely shattered. Broken glass was scattered across the floor. The detective walked to the window and looked down. From that height, it led directly to the exact spot where the body had been found. The officers carefully searched the apartment again, hoping to find fingerprints, a suicide note, or any clue that could explain what had happened. But there was nothing. No evidence. No witnesses. No answers. Based on the broken window and the victim's injuries, the police concluded that the man had jumped from the bathroom window. After finishing the investigation, they sealed the apartment and left. A few days later, the autopsy report arrived. According to the medical examiner, the victim had died after jumping from the building, and the report suggested that he had been suffering from extreme fear and psychological distress just before his death. The case appeared to be solved, but the people who worked in that apartment building knew there was something the police didn't. To be continued. About 5 days later, the security guards were sitting together, talking about the incident. One of them broke the silence. That apartment finally claimed another life. He whispered, "If only someone had warned that poor man sooner." The others looked at him in confusion. "What do you mean?" An older guard took a deep breath before answering. "I've worked here for almost 10 years, he said. "And everything started about 4.5 years ago. There was a young woman living alone in apartment 1002. Her name was Chanda. She was beautiful, quiet, and rarely stayed home. Most nights, she'd come back around 1 or 2 in the morning. But she was never alone. I saw the same man dropping her off over and over again. One night, they arrived together around 11 p.m. and went upstairs. The apartment lights stayed on until almost 1 a.m. Then suddenly, loud screaming started coming from inside. It sounded like they were having a terrible fight. I thought about going upstairs, but I didn't want to interfere in someone else's personal matter, so I stayed at my post. After nearly 30 minutes, everything went completely silent. At around 1:30 a.m., the apartment lights turned off. A few moments later, the young man came downstairs alone. He jumped onto his motorcycle and sped away as fast as he could. That was the last time anyone ever saw him there. And from that night onward, no one ever saw Chanda again. To be continued. The next morning, one of the security guards decided to check apartment 1002 himself. He knocked on the door. No answer. He rang the bell again. Still, nothing. Thinking something felt wrong, he unlocked the apartment and searched every room. It was completely empty. No sign of Chanda. No sign of a struggle. No sign that anyone had even been there. Days turned into weeks, but Chanda never returned. No one ever reported seeing her again. At first, everyone assumed she had simply moved away. But then, Strange things started happening on the 10th floor. Late at night, residents began hearing a loud knock, knock, knock. It sounded as if someone was trapped inside apartment 1002, desperately pounding on the walls. Sometimes, people heard footsteps running through the empty apartment. Other nights, someone claimed they saw a shadow sitting silently in the corner, crying. The lights inside apartment 1002 would randomly switch on, then off again, even though no one lived there anymore. Night after night, the terrifying incidents became more frequent. Residents grew too frightened to stay. One family moved out, then another, until eventually, the entire 10th floor was abandoned. For almost 1 year, apartment 1002 remained completely empty. Everyone in the building believed something inside that apartment was waiting for someone new to move in. To be continued. Almost a year later, a man named Shailesh purchased apartment 1002. The price was unbelievably low. A luxury apartment in a premium building, being sold for almost half its value. To Shailesh, it felt like the deal of a lifetime. He had no idea why no one else wanted it. Excited to start a new chapter, he spent the entire day cleaning the apartment with his own hands. Out of the 2 bedrooms, he chose the larger one as his master bedroom. Everything looked perfect. A large bed stood in the center of the room. But one thing immediately caught his attention. A framed portrait of a beautiful young woman, hung on the wall directly across. From the bed, she had a gentle smile, and strangely, Shailesh couldn't stop looking at her. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the portrait for several minutes. There was something oddly comforting about her smile. From that day on, every time he walked into the bedroom, his eyes automatically drifted toward the picture. At night, before going to sleep, he would smile back at it without even realizing it, as if the girl in the portrait was smiling only at him. But after a few days, that comforting feeling slowly began to change. Whenever Shailesh walked through the apartment, he started feeling as though someone was silently following him. Every single step. Whenever he suddenly turned around, there was never anyone there. But the feeling never went away. To be continued. As the days passed, the strange feeling inside apartment 1002 only grew stronger. At first, it was subtle. While sitting alone in the living room, Shailesh would hear faint noises coming from the kitchen, then the balcony, and sometimes even the bathroom. He searched every corner of the apartment, but there was never anyone there. Ignoring it, he convinced himself that it was just an old building making noises. But soon, the sounds became impossible to ignore. Late at night, he often felt as if someone was sitting beneath his bed, silently staring at him from the darkness. No matter how many times he looked underneath, the space was always empty. Then the nightmares began. Almost every night, he dreamed that someone was wrapping icy hands around his throat, slowly choking him to death. Sometimes, a shadow would stand beside his bed, watching him sleep without saying a single word. Each time he woke up, his heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of his chest. One night, as he caught his breath, his eyes slowly drifted toward the portrait hanging across the room. His blood ran cold. The smiling girl didn't seem to be smiling anymore. Her face looked different. Her eyes were filled with sadness, almost as if she was silently trying to tell him something. From that night onward, every time Shailesh looked at the portrait, it felt less like a painting and more like someone watching him. To be continued. A few days later, Shailesh had to leave the city for a work trip that would last almost 5 days. Before leaving, he locked apartment 1002 and drove away, expecting everything to be exactly the same when he returned. But it wasn't. During those 5 days, the apartment refused to stay silent. Almost every night, the security guards heard loud crashing noises coming from inside. It sounded as if someone was throwing furniture across the rooms. Even stranger, the lights inside apartment 1002 would suddenly turn on in the middle of the night, then switch off again a few minutes later. One guard even claimed he saw someone standing motionless on the balcony, a dark figure, just staring into the night. Moments later, heavy footsteps echoed across the balcony. It sounded like someone was running back and forth, desperately searching for something they had lost. The noises became so terrifying that the night guard stopped going anywhere near the 10th floor. Then, 5 days later, Shailesh finally returned home. It was nearly 11 p.m. As soon as he unlocked the front door, he froze. The entire apartment was a complete mess. Furniture had been overturned. Chairs were lying on the floor. Drawers had been pulled open. It looked as though someone had searched every inch of the apartment. Confused, Shailesh rushed downstairs to question the security guard. But he learned something unexpected. The night watchman had resigned and never came back. Believing thieves had broken into the apartment, Shailesh tried to ignore it. He cleaned up the mess, turned on all the lights, and walked into the kitchen to make himself a cup of coffee. He had no idea that the worst night of his life was about to begin. To be continued. After finishing his coffee, Shailesh walked into his bedroom and laid down on the bed. His eyes slowly drifted toward the portrait on the wall. The young woman was smiling again, just like she had when he first moved in. Relieved, he closed his eyes and eventually fell asleep. Then, knock, knock, knock. At exactly 2 a.m., the sound jolted him awake. It was coming from the wall directly across from his bed. Shailesh sat up, listening carefully. The knocking stopped. Silence filled the room. Thinking he had imagined it, he lay back down. But the moment he looked at the portrait again, his heart nearly stopped. The smile was gone. The girl's face had turned cold, sad, almost lifeless. Shailesh slowly got out of bed and stepped closer to the painting. He couldn't explain it, but something about her face was changing. Then, her eyes slowly turned blood red. A horrifying smile spread across her face. Before he could react, the girl's face began pushing out of the portrait, inch by inch, as if she were crawling into the room. Her mouth stretched, unnaturally wide as a chilling laugh echoed through the bedroom. Shailesh screamed and stumbled backward, collapsing onto the floor. He blinked. The portrait was normal again. Shaking uncontrollably, he climbed back onto the bed, pulled the blanket over his head, and tried to convince himself it had all been a nightmare. Then, knock, knock, knock. The sound returned. This time, it was much closer. To be continued. The knocking grew louder. Knock, knock, knock. Shailesh slowly lowered the blanket and opened his eyes. His body froze. A pale, rotten hand was slowly reaching out from the wall, stretching toward him. He blinked. The hand vanished. Everything looked normal again. His heart was pounding so violently that he could barely breathe. Just as he tried to calm himself, someone suddenly yanked the blanket off his body. Shailesh let out a terrified scream. He looked toward the portrait. The girl was gone. The frame was empty. At that exact moment, the wall exploded with deafening bangs. Bang, bang, bang. It sounded as if someone trapped inside was desperately trying to break free. Then, a woman's crying echoed from within the wall. Soft at first, then louder and louder. Unable to control his fear, Shailesh slowly walked toward the wall. His hands were shaking. He leaned closer, trying to hear where the crying was coming from. Suddenly, 2 decayed hands burst out of the wall and grabbed him by the throat. Shailesh gasped for air as the icy fingers tightened around his neck. He fought with everything he had, kicking, pulling, struggling to breathe. After a desperate fight, he finally broke free. Without looking back, he ran out of the bedroom and into the next room. But before he could catch his breath, every light in the apartment went out. The entire apartment was swallowed by darkness. And then, he felt something standing right behind him. To be continued. Shailesh stood frozen in the darkness. He could feel someone's hot breath against the back of his neck. Slow, heavy, right behind him. But when he turned around, there was no one there. His fear finally took over. He started running blindly through the apartment, desperately searching for the front door. But somehow, no matter which direction he ran, he always ended up back where he started. It was as if the apartment itself refused to let him leave. Then, he spotted the bathroom. Without wasting another second, he rushed inside and slammed the door shut, locking it from the inside. For a brief moment, everything became silent. Then, bang, something hit the bathroom door. Again, bang, bang, bang. The entire door shook violently, as if someone or something was trying to break it down. Cracks began appearing around the frame. Shailesh knew the door wouldn't hold much longer. Panicking, he turned toward the small rear window. It was his only way out. With his bare hands, he smashed the glass. Sharp shards sliced through his palms, and blood streamed down his fingers. Ignoring the pain, he climbed onto the window ledge. He looked back one last time. The pounding suddenly stopped. The bathroom door slowly creaked open by itself, and a tall, pitch-black figure stepped inside. Its glowing eyes locked onto Shailesh. Without thinking, He jumped from the 10th floor as his body disappeared into the darkness. A horrifying scream echoed through the night. Moments later, the shadow stood silently at the broken window, watching him fall. To be continued. The next morning, residents woke to the horrifying news. A man had fallen to his death from the 10th floor. His body was discovered directly beneath apartment 1002. The victim was Shailesh. The police ruled it as a suicide caused by extreme fear. But something about the case never felt right. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Yet one mystery refused to disappear. Who was Chanda? And what had really happened inside apartment 1002? Determined to uncover the truth, detectives reopened the investigation. They decided to demolish the very wall. The same wall from which countless residents had reported hearing strange knocking sounds for years. As the workers broke through the concrete, the entire room fell silent. Hidden inside the wall was a human skeleton. DNA testing confirmed the unimaginable truth. The remains belonged to Chanda, the young woman who had mysteriously disappeared 4.5 years earlier. Police immediately tracked down her former boyfriend. During interrogation, he finally confessed. On the night of their violent argument, he had murdered Chanda in a fit of rage. Then, to hide the crime forever, he sealed her body inside the apartment wall before fleeing. The case was finally solved. Chanda had never left apartment 1002. She had been trapped inside it all along. A few days later, the police returned one last time to permanently seal the apartment. Before leaving, one officer looked at the portrait hanging on the bedroom wall. He stopped walking. Everyone remembered that the girl in the picture had always looked sad. But now, she was smiling. The same warm, peaceful smile she had before she disappeared. And after that day, apartment 1002 was never haunted again. The knocking stopped. The crying disappeared. And for the first time in 4.5 years, the silence inside apartment 1002 finally felt peaceful. But some stories never truly end. 6 months later, a new family moved into apartment 1002. The apartment had been completely renovated. Fresh paint, new furniture, bright lights. No trace of the terrible past remained. The real estate agent smiled. Everything is perfect now. That night, the family's little daughter couldn't sleep. She quietly walked into the hallway. Her parents found her standing in front of the bedroom wall, talking to someone. Her mother asked, "Sweetheart, who are you talking to?" The little girl slowly turned around. She smiled, then pointed at the wall and whispered, "The smiling auntie says thank you." Her parents looked at the empty wall. There was no one there, only silence. Then, knock, knock, knock. The lights suddenly went out. The end. If this story kept you hooked till the end, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. More original horror stories are coming soon, because sometimes the next story is even more terrifying than the last. See you in the next nightmare.